Hello there. Welcome to interview number 3 of Everyday Heroes, presented to you by Creation, Justice, and Peace, part of the TSSF initiative. We will begin in prayer before we get to our interview from Jim Crosby, who comes from us from beautiful Texas. Let's begin. Dear Lord, may we all be filled with the love that acts on behalf of life. May we remember that action on behalf of life transforms and heals. May we all heal all life on earth, knowing that healing God's good earth will also heal us. Thank you very much. And thank you very much for being with us today, Jim. We really appreciate it. Little introduction. Jim has been with TSSF since '06. And he is associated with Campaign Nonviolence, and I'm sure we will hear about that. And I look forward to getting to know Jim. It's the first time that we have met, and so it's great fun to get to know yet another wonderful person within the order. We'll start off with this question, Jim. Just first of all, a little bit about yourself, just a little bit about your life. And so our first question will be to learn about you is, how did your life, what happened in your life to bring you to become a Franciscan? What happened?
Born and raised Episcopalian in Del Rio, Texas, which is on the border with Mexico, on the Rio Grande. And I guess I saw there, some of the inequities in our culture. And was spoken to from early on about the positive aspects of being a democracy, and seeing it unevenly applied, I guess, to the people. There were not that many African Americans in Del Rio, but I had a significant second mom in Bernice Perry, who was African American and was worked in my house my folks' house from the time I was 6, I think. And so second mom, and but mainly Hispanic culture, and there were people at that time. There were a lot of Mexican Americans in Del Rio, but also fairly free access with people who walked across the bridge every day to work in Del Rio and then went back home to Mexico at night. But just seeing inequities and something inconsistent in our culture and our aspirations from early on, I think, was part of what gave me a bent toward the prophetic, if you will. And we moved to Austin when I was ready for my freshman year of high school. So I was 13, almost about to turn 14, and went to St. Stephen's Episcopal School, which has ended up playing a large role in my life, and very progressive school. And and my dad was in the cable television. He was one of the pioneers, really, of the cable television business. And it was partly due to his success building the system in Del Rio that we wound up moving to Austin, because he needed a place with an airport to travel around the country doing business. And so by the time I was in college, it was let's see. MLK's assassination was in the spring of '68, which was my sophomore year of high school. So I had 2 more years of high school, but immediately some seniors that year started an MLK scholarship fund. And one of the people who has gone on to influence me most of my life was from up in Fort Worth. He was the first recipient of the MLK scholarship. And I always said he turned our football team from 2-6 one season to 6-2 the next. And he went to play at Yale. Rudy Green is his name. Went on to play at Yale and break a lot of rushing records there. So race was huge in that time in my life, high school and especially college. And as far as the movement, it became then anti-war, and so I was engaged somewhat in that in my college days. In the midst of my college days, I took a semester off first, and ended up being 2 semesters off from school, and wound up at L'Abri, a place in Switzerland, with Francis Schaeffer. He was an American child evangelist from St. Louis, who had wound up with his family in Switzerland and developed this community around him called L'Abri. And so he was very much an evangelical preacher and somewhat prophetic himself, I guess. And so I had kind of an evangelical conversion experience there, halfway through my college career. And so got real involved with InterVarsity Christian Fellowship. And I've always said that the two main things that I have really appreciated and taken from that time of more conservative Christianity than I've wound up living since then were great appreciation for the Bible and Bible study and a prayer time, quiet time in the morning. And that's meditation has been shaped a lot by both that emphasis on having that quiet time and prayer and meditation aren't the same thing, but they go hand in hand for me. And so I think building, accruing, if you will, a spirituality across the years that says, okay, we need to be socially engaged, but we also need to be contemplative. So action and contemplation, as Richard Rohr would say.
Yeah.
Um,
Yep.
so that's from way back. And then let's
Was
see.
there a moment, but in particular the Franciscan path, because being a third order Franciscan, like there's Christianity and wonderful things, but the particular spin that we have on it is, highly out there, especially if you're not Catholic. Like
Yeah.
something happened to be a little bit of an odd duck.
Yeah. 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 And uh, my wife Tara is Catholic and grew up on the saints. We wound up for just a night, I guess, a day and a night in Assisi on our honeymoon.
Oh,
And
wow.
I think it was there that in our room, we stayed at a convent and it had rooms and they had G.K. Chesterson's biography of Francis in the room. And so I think I read it all in that time we were there instead of seeing the sights.
Yeah.
And so was pretty taken with Francis at that point. And that would have been in 1979. And then it wasn't until 2002, I actually became, when was that? 1993, I became a teacher at St. Stephen's, my high school alma mater, and ended up teaching there, not starting till I was 40, teaching there for 27 years and retiring 4 years ago. And during the course of that time, I taught mainly the required senior 12th grade theology class. And so I was really giving myself, I had never gone to, full seminary, MDiv or anything, but I gave myself a theological education through that 27 years, just ongoing, reading. And in 2002, I had been hearing about, local fellowship, TSSF, and met those folks. And some of the people who see this might remember Francesca Weigel, who
Oh
her
yeah,
name
I
was,
remember her well. Oh, I
okay.
did I did the daily office with her for years
Yeah,
on
yeah,
virtually. It
yeah,
was great. She was such a, I don't know, she was quite the inspiring,
yeah.
God-filled person, eh? And so you lived near her.
She was the heart of our fellowship. We had,
Right.
six
Absolutely.
people that gathered monthly and did these wonderful twice a year, quote unquote, retreats. And she just kept us laughing the whole time and
Yeah.
pretty much on task, and as far as, gathering for spiritual purposes uh, and seeing the spiritual aspect of laughter. And
Yeah.
um, so I got involved. So 2002 through 2006 was my, postulancy and novicing. And um, and I had been, I think, since at least 2001. I think Wendell Berry was probably one of those people who, at first, there's six or eight, you know, influences, writers who I think I first heard of in Sojourners magazine, which I
Right.
had started reading
Sure.
in my college years, even back when it was Post American, I think, before it became Sojourners. And anyway, Wendell Berry figured large, and it was somebody I had read some of before 9/11, but the stuff that he wrote, and I saw, I think Orion magazine took out a full page in the New York Times to publish what he had written about immediately after 9/11. And so I read everything I could of his for some years after that. And as far as the ecological side of, our Franciscan charism, he's been a big influence there. He and Thomas Berry, no relation.
Yeah.
Uh, the first, he styled himself a geologian. Um, so the two of them were huge as far as, my early years as a Franciscan, and with Wendell, it was largely, aspiring to being a, if not a gentleman farmer, a semi-serious gardener, which I've been able to do the
Oh,
last few
good.
years.
How is the gardening in near Austin, Texas? I have no idea. I always think it's
Yeah,
relatively dry. So do things
yeah,
grow?
I do a lot of watering, and I've got raised beds, and it's mainly leafy greens.
Right.
And this time around, I dawdled. We spent some time in Austin with house sitting for some friends, and I had my trays for seeds and stuff. I was going to get them started, and I didn't. And so it wasn't until we got back settled at our place in like mid-October, and I got back from a 2-week trip, that I finally started some seeds in the ground in my raised beds. And so I don't know if they're going to make it through the first freeze. I'm going to cover them, I think, when it looks like we're going to get that. We haven't had that yet, but the last
Right.
few nights have gotten down into the high 30s. So anyway, I've got some little seedlings that may or may not make, but
Okay, so
springtime,
you've got these twin influences of the sort of help who's ever on the bottom of the totem pole, and then the healing of the earth, and so that's a natural fit to be a Franciscan for sure. Now,
yeah.
why did Verlea said, Gord, you have to reach out to Jim? So, what's the particular uniqueness of Jim within our Franciscan family?
Well, the thing that I've been thinking about in recent times, kind of a sequence for me, is in the last year or two of his life, is definitely in the Vietnam speech, Beyond Vietnam at Riverside, which was, a year to the day before MLK was assassinated. Um, so April 4th, 1967, he talked about the evil triplets of racism, militarism, and materialism.
Right.
And when I started Nonviolent Austin, which was the fall of 2018, and we started standing, we've got a weekly vigil, and I've got a banner we use from Campaign Nonviolence that says ending war, poverty, racism, and environmental destruction. So they had picked up those three evil triplets and added, ecological concern, across the past 60 years to it. And then I got pretty involved for a while with the Poor People's Campaign, which has basically those four, plus they add concern about, more recent still, about the rise of religious nationalism. So they say that the five interlocking evils that they're throwing their weight against are um, poverty, obviously, Poor People's Campaign, white supremacist racism, the war economy, interesting, as far as the emphasis on militarism, um, environmental destruction, and the false moral narrative of religious nationalism. So one of my phrases in recent months has been, uh, "There's nothing Christian about nationalism." You
Mhm.
know, thinking
Mhm.
about whether we put it in terms of Jesus saying, "My kingdom is not of this world," or just all his teachings about our oneness, um, and um, seeing how nationalism, goes against that. I
Mhm.
suppose divides
Well,
us from.
when you do that, when you talking about Francesca Wiggle earlier, who made me smile because she makes everybody smile, and you made a point of this idea of laughter and her emphasis on laughter.
Mhm,
How are you able to bring that in? Because I mean, we always
mhm,
think of Francis as a troubadour and a sort of a party guy, and always, he didn't do the downer side of Christianity. He did the joyful side of Christianity. So how has that played into your work? Because you're describing things which are very much of the culture of the age. Like, this is quite a normal, people, non-Christians would hear what you're now saying and say, oh yeah, I could buy into that. Not everybody, but a lot of people would say, sure. But
Mhm.
what's that extra spice of joy that the path that we have, that people can look at you and say, oh, there's this something. Jim has got this something. I don't know what it is. And you know what I mean? So that you're not just another nice guy. Like Christ wasn't just another nice guy. Like if we're just another nice guy, that's not our journey, right?
Yeah. And I think Francis, on balance, I mean, he uh Ken Budigan, who's become quite a friend and teacher to me, makes a good case for historically Francis dealing with PTSD, going off to war a couple of times and spending a year or so in a dungeon, and then all that time in the woods, and sleeping on rocks and stuff. That there was a measure of penance, I think, going on, and maybe it was intuitive. He wasn't talking about PTSD as such, but his own healing, I think, was happening through that, and him playing a stick violin and stuff like that. It can be a continuation of the party guy stuff, but also just, I think he struck this balance, and he, once he got over kissing the leper, for example, he found great joy in, living with, serving, the least of these. And so, um, and I think it came from genuine humility and not taking himself too seriously.
Yeah.
But
And
there,
how do
but there,
you do that? How do you do that in your way? What's your unique? Because we're inspired by Francis, but we're not Francis, right? You're
right,
Jim. So what makes you that, something that other people can learn from you? Like I think everybody has this unique gift. You're a hero. Like our talk is everyday heroes,
uh-huh.
right? And
Mhm.
so what is it that to what you do, the nonviolence, the racism, all of that good
Mhm.
healing work? What's the
Mhm.
little salt and pepper that's Jim?
Mhm. Music is a lot of it for sure.
Yeah.
Um, my avocations are country blues, finger pick guitar music, pre-electric, and especially two people, Mississippi John Hurt,
Yeah.
recorded back in the 20s,
Yeah.
and then rediscovered quote unquote in 63 from a song that he had played back, he'd recorded on a 78 back in the 20s called Avalon, My Hometown. Somebody listened to that and went and looked him up and found him in
Yeah.
1963. And so from then through 66, the last 3 years of his life, he kind of toured on the college circuit and stuff and was part of the blues revival. And him, and then Reverend Gary Davis was just this phenomenal guitarist, had a huge influence on lots of people that are still playing today. And so those two, they were songsters as much as bluesmen, and they played for church, they played for dances and all that kind of stuff. And Gary Davis's case, he played his best album arguably is Harlem Street Singer. So after he moved from the South, he played, on the streets of Harlem, and played in the little storefront churches on Sundays. But there was great joy in their music for sure, in spite of the poverty they grew up in and with, and all the obstacles, being black men in the South through the Jim Crow era. And so, I mean, that's a lot of it, is just when you think about Genesis 1, God created and said it was good. Okay,
Yeah,
we've had a
absolutely.
lot
Now,
of
I'm assuming you're a guitarist. Is that a safe
yeah.
assumption?
I always say I play at it. I don't, not necessarily say I play guitar, but I play at it. And those two people have been trying for 50 years to learn, more and more of their stuff.
Right.
And so that's great joy to me. Also, literature, I read a lot, and love to find kindred spirits and feel like I know people. And one thing about Thomas Berry, who I mentioned, I got to interview him a couple of times when he was in his 80s, I think, and um, maybe 2002 and 2004. And it was mainly his book called The Great Work, which was a profound ecological influence on me. And he's basically arguing there that we need to see, as many people have seen and said since then, we need to see ourselves as part of the natural world rather than above or outside it, and as humans. And um, and he said the four wisdoms that we need to uh, wisdom traditions, if you will, that we need to emphasize, focus on more are the wisdoms of um, women, indigenous peoples, science, and then the traditional wisdoms of philosophy and religion. And uh, so got to interview him a couple of times and just had this real sense of, or where I was going with that is I thought from knowing a little about his background when I asked him, what were the major influences on him, or who was the main influence, that he would say either Pierre Taylor de Chardin, because
Right,
he had for a time been, I think, the secretary of the Chardin Society or something,
right,
or maybe theologically he would say Thomas Aquinas, because he'd been a part of the Thomistic revival in the early 20th century. And he said Aristotle.
oh, that's
What I
very odd. Oh
and
yeah,
his early background, he'd lived for a while in China and stuff, and his early background was Chinese and Indian, religious traditions, as far as being a scholar before he turned to ecology as a focus. And so people like Lao Tzu and Confucius
yeah,
and the Buddha and Aristotle, uh, Aquinas, were people that he felt like he knew and conversed with day to day, you know.
right,
So they were his friends. And so I was just really struck by that,
yeah.
that you immerse yourself in uh, people's ways of thinking, and you feel like you get to know them. So yeah.
Have you written much, Jim?
Not much. I wound up being lay chaplain at St. Stephen's in my 27 years there, and wrote sermons. Uh,
Right.
got to do some preaching there, and my main writing project, which has lingered for probably 15 years now. Um, the other thing I was going to say, besides music and reading good books, is movies. I've loved movies, and for a while before I started teaching, I thought maybe I was going to pursue. I did do some screenwriting, and thought about pursuing movie making as a career. And but an earlier graduate of St. Stephen's, an alum, is a fellow named Terrence Malick, who has, starting in 1973 with one called Badlands, he's made 9 feature films in that
Yeah,
span of time. And uh, he's he when he was a Rhodes Scholar around that time, working, in grad school, he wrote a manuscript, a translation of one of Heidegger's shorter books. And so there he's kind of this heavyweight philosopher, although he wouldn't talk of himself that way, and who then fairly early on was one of the first cohort, I think, at the American Film Institute. And then, like I say, in 73, he made Badlands. In 78, he made Days of Heaven, which both just made a real splash. And then he went for 20 years without making a film. And then he's made 7 more since then. But since what, 98. And the thing about Terry, well, his films are unique as far as use of voiceover, use of music, including classical music. But raising philosophical and more recently theological questions. And and I felt like he was underappreciated and misunderstood. A lot of people find him kind of slow, but to me they're just phenomenal in as far as filmmaking, um, cinematic productions go. And so I've written a book, a manuscript, um, taking each of his 9 feature films to date, or the first 8 of them anyway, and making a chapter of each. And it's introduction to his works from a theological slant basically, and but trying to do like he does, which is more Socratic. One of my early titles for it, working titles, was
So
Socratic cinema.
I'm gonna give you a challenge since we're here, and we're I know we're both very young men, but we all need challenges, right? Why don't you
Mhm.
finish the book?
Yeah,
Actually do her, get her done. You
my
know?
friends have been asking me, encouraging me, and yeah, that, it should happen fairly soon.
Oh, wonderful. Because I write as well, and I never felt good enough to publish. So what I did is I started a couple books,
Mhm.
and I had a really great time. I did a couple of road trips to a particular location to, get the place for the story, right? And whenever you told, say, oh, I'm writing a book and your town is going to be the setting, everybody's door opened, have a beer, whatever, right? It was awesome.
Yep.
Right? And so we are, so I think it's great, but I remember sitting down and actually doing it is quite hard. So I went to a workshop with some Irish writer, and I asked her, so how do you actually, make it happen? She said, but on chair, but stays on chair. That was it. That's the recipe. Just so you know, there's the advice from this Irish writer.
Yeah. I've had, chapter by chapter, I've had a wonderful experience of that. And, I think on average, it's taken me 3 weeks or so to write about a particular film, basically in sequestering myself and watching the film itself, like, 10 to 15 times, taking all kinds of notes, almost, writing the whole script out again. And then, the themes and stuff bubbling up as far as what I wanted to especially point out and the Socratic questions it raised for me. And so, yeah, that's, I know I love
our audience wants to have that book. Okay. So we're going to put some heavy duty pressure from all our virtual friends out there. Okay. In the third order. Okay. I got one last question. We have 8 minutes and 41 seconds to go. Zoom tells us, and then they just chop the guillotine down and we get shut down. Okay. So, I'm with Creation, Justice, and Peace. I've been with the environmental movement, deeply immersed, and I was attracted to the Franciscan path because I saw a lot of people trying to do healing of the earth without a spiritual foundation and getting really depressed and really anxious and things that weren't going well for them. It wasn't bringing them a lot of joy. And so I said, well, this is not good. We need to, can't heal the earth without healing myself, right? It's a two-way street here. And my neighbors as well, which means not judging my neighbors, right?
Yep.
When they have a big, Ford Bronco, when I just, that's not my job, right? So, so my last question, and you've got like a few minutes to respond, is that how is your particular looking at the world as it is now? And you're if you're down by the Mexico border, you're right where things are happening. Where do you think's at in a human and an ecological sense? Because I see it, as Thomas Berry said, there's no separation between human society and what we call nature. We're all just one bunch living together, right? Bunch of creatures, created beings in a giant community. So where do you see things are at, and what can we be doing as Franciscans to be part of the healing of the earth? So I'm sort of elaborating, going from Thomas Berry, I guess, more to Wendell Berry as us as healers of the earth. We're not separate, and we are now to heal. Christ, how do we heal the earth given what with the damage we've done? So how can we do that as Franciscans? What do you see are different options that work for you? Like, I'm not saying the answer, but what has been your answer to that question?
Well, again, the influence of the two Berries, but especially Wendell, as I think about, my garden, trying to, I feel like awe is something that we have naturally as kids, and we're trained out of to some degree, educated out of, just like, nonviolence, whatever, natural goodness and stuff we have as kids. I think we're educated into violence, whether it's the just war theory or, God is on our side, or however we put it. Or child rearing methods. So I think getting past that sense of like some of the stuff you sent me, I think it talked about Descartes, and that everything else besides humans, including animals, is just mechanism. Getting beyond that, with starting with animals and plants, and looking out and saying, okay, those first few verses of the Bible, God looking at it and saying, this is good. we need to see that and stand in awe of it. And that's part of what Terry's movies have done for me. And it's certainly part of what Thomas Berry taught me is the need for awe. I'm sitting on my neighbor's screen porch right now, and you may hear the noise. There's a blue jay flying around out there. And so just being able to slow down enough, do away with screen time enough, perhaps is what it is, for a lot of us. But to be outside, to be trying to grow, being more aware, something that Wendellberry certainly emphasizes, at least, if you're not going to grow your own food or able to grow your own food, at least knowing where it comes from, maybe becoming part of a, CSA, community supported agriculture, and getting to know your supplier of food, I think is huge. But moving back out here, we live in a log cabin that we had built from two old log structures back in the early 80s. And St. Stephen's is a boarding day school, and we lived on campus for 25 of those 27 years. And retiring 4 years ago and moving back out here, and especially starting the garden, I feel like I'm so much more aware of the weather, for one thing, and rain, and when we could use more rain, which is kind of all the time around here. So just whatever small moves we can make in those regards. And Tara, my wife, and I have really struggled with, we've both got Priuses, Prii, and so for some years, but commuting the half hour or so in and out from here to Austin, as often as we do, we've wound up doing a lot of grandchild care, and that's really exciting and a chance for me to learn more.
Wonderful. Yeah, I've got a grandchild living with me. And isn't it just so life-giving? Just the joy. It's just,
And again, a return to that, seeing things through their eyes and returning to some of that awe, you
yeah,
know.
yeah,
So
yeah.
yeah, those little steps, and uh we've started consolidating our driving more, as far as both trying to go to town at the same time, and just
Yeah.
take one car and stuff. But um, those kind of things are real issues. We haven't gotten solar on our roof yet, so and I'm not sure when and if that will happen. And we haven't gotten rainwater catchment yet, but that's something to aspire to.
Yeah.
So
Well,
I
hopefully you're inspiring your neighbors with your joy as well, and you're just a happy guy, and you just like, love your neighbor, I hope I'm sure I can sense that coming from you. I'm going
thank
to have to shut us down quickly. But I want to thank you so much. And
thank you.
what I'd like to do is I'd like to actually phone you afterwards and have a little bit of a chat. Okay, if that's possible.
Yeah.
And I would like to, if you could do a gift for all of our audience and leave us with a prayer, please.
Okay. Well, if you don't mind, it'll be a canned prayer. One I've used a
Sure.
whole in my meditation, etc. In recent years. It's the World Peace Prayer. So, the
Yeah.
Lord be with you. Let us pray. Oh God, lead us from death to life, from falsehood to truth. Lead us from despair to hope, from fear to trust. Lead us from hate to love, from war to peace, and let peace fill our hearts, our world, our universe. Amen.
Amen. What a blessing. It's just a blessing, in spite of our rants about screen time, it's such a blessing for me way up here in the north of Canada to be sharing this great time of smiling at each other. It's like wonderful.
Blessing to me. Thanks.
Okay. God bless and thank you so much. Thanks so much.